Morning, everyone. Thanks for coming to tonight's webinar on extracurricular activities and a resume and how they make so much difference in the world of college admission. So we're broadcasting live. We're both on Facebook and YouTube, and this will also be recorded, and you'll be able to get a copy of the recording as well. There are a number of handouts for this evening's webinar, which you can download, later, tomorrow, whenever they'll be up. But there are things that are going to reinforce almost everything that I'm going to be speaking about tonight. Just quickly, what they are. The first one is just an infographic of all the most important factors in college admission. The second one is because we have so many Florida students and parents listening in this evening. It's the admission stats, most recent admission stats for admission to our 12 state universities here in Florida. It's a 2-page handout. The second page has our SAT and ACT workshop schedule. I also want to share with you admission stats for 2023 and how competitive admission got, because it will also put the role of extracurricular activities into better perspective. And we have 2 different versions of a Common App activities worksheet. As some of you may know, Common App has significant restrictions in terms of the number of characters to describe and name each activity. So we have some great shortcuts and tricks for getting that down to the right number of characters, but 2 different versions of a worksheet that can help students create what they want to put in Common App, and it's a very important page of Common App. And then thanks to my good friend Nancy Griesemer, we have a list of all the colleges this year allowing or requesting a resume as part of the application process. So one of the most important things to keep in mind is that during the college admission process, admission officers are really looking for kids who are completely engaged in their school and in their community. So that reflects across many domains of the admissions process. Certainly the extracurricular domain, but also what teachers have to say about a student, how a student, presents herself in an essay, but especially in extracurricular activities, because students have a real opportunity to show off what it is that they have accomplished, how they have impacted others or themselves, and basically how they persisted, how much grit they have, and the resilience that they may have shown in the face of adversity. So this lists pretty much the same things that you're going to see if you download that first item listed, the most important factors in college admission. And I think one of the important things to really see is that the extracurricular commitment is very, very high up on the list. And in fact, the first 2 items are very much, interrelated. It's basically a student's academic record. And it does make sense that that would be the driving factor in college admission. A student's courses, grades, the progression of courses, the number of courses, the level of challenge, test scores. And yes, we know that SAT and ACT are optional in many places, but much data is out there showing that submitting high scores can improve a chance for admission. But right after that is a student's extracurricular commitment. And I think that there's a lot of misunderstanding out there in terms of what constitutes an extracurricular activity, how many activities should a student have, what level of commitment, really matters. And certainly for students who are aiming for our nation's most competitive schools, what do their activities have to look like? Do they need to be, different from a student who is aiming for a less competitive university in terms of its admission. So there are at least a half a dozen, I would say, key characteristics that really great extracurriculars all have in common. And I'd say that the first two to me are just the most important. Colleges don't want to see a student who tried one activity freshman year, a different activity sophomore year, started something else junior year, or a student who just suddenly at the beginning of senior year gets involved in a whole bunch of different activities. They are looking for long-term commitment. 4 years is best, 3 years is next best, etc. Yes, there are some activities that may only be available for, let's say, 1 year. Maybe one year there was a mayor's council and you're only allowed to be on it for 1 year. That's a whole different story. But basically long-term commitment, and although colleges care only about what students have done during their high school years, if there's an activity that started in middle school, soccer or band, but has continued through high school, then that long-term commitment is actually even more than 4 years. And although Common App doesn't have a way to easily show that, a resume does. They also want to see a level of leadership, and whether it's an elected or an appointed position doesn't really matter. And even if it's a role that is not, let's say, an officer, but is head of a committee, or a student who's a member of some club and who goes to the advisor of the club and says, I would like to become more involved. I would like to help organize, our next bake sale, whatever it may be. These are things that you can highlight, in a resume. Of course, the more responsibility of leadership, the better. And we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail. But so far we have a combination of looking for long-term commitment and leadership. And colleges love kids who take initiative, who have sort of an entrepreneurial talent. And when I say entrepreneurial, I don't necessarily mean starting a business, but starting something. So whether you're starting a new community service an initiative, or starting a new club at school, some kind of just new effort, or something within an existing organization that you're expanding it and bringing something new to it. So you're not afraid to take a risk by starting something. But you can't just always be, the Indian chief, the leader. They also like to see collaboration. And honestly, a wonderful resume is going to have the activities that can showcase both leadership and collaboration, and whether those are in the same activity or 2 or 3 different activities. But colleges want to know that students know how to take a leadership role, but they also know how to cooperate and reach consensus, bring new ideas, interact with their peers, so that collaboration is incredibly important. Athletes, thespians, collaboration is part of what they do, normally. It's great to be able to highlight the impact you have had on other people, and whether it's a club or a community service or taking care of someone, it's that level of impact that is also important. And if you have an activity that is has great relevance to your intended major, that's even better. Let's just say that you're applying to college and indicating that you're going to follow a pre-medical track, that your career goal is to become some kind of a healthcare provider. If you have volunteered in a hospital, worked in a pharmacy, done medical shadowing, done some research, those are things that support that choice of major. If you say you want to be a math major and you're in Mu Alpha Theta and you're competing in math, that competition in math is even more important if you're going to be a math major. So if you can identify activities that are related to something you think you might want to major in, that can also add to an activity being incredibly meaningful. So what colleges really want to see is fewer activities with a greater depth of commitment. So the student who might have 10 or 15 activities with not anything being sort of major number of hours, that's not great. In other words, don't go in and join 6 clubs at school, pay your dues, go to an occasional meeting. That's not going to do you any good. Maybe join 1, maybe 2 clubs, but take a very major role in it so that you have, greater commitment. And this is just sort of a list that off the top of my head of just looking over some of my current students, different activities to say, okay, here is an idea of what can be an activity, and almost anything can really be an activity. It could just be a hobby. But notice that I have in here is the third one, caring for a family member. And actually, it doesn't have to be family, but if one of your responsibilities is to, let's say, get home early enough after school to entertain your younger siblings and maybe make dinner until parents get home or something like that, that is an activity. And even Common App acknowledges that that's, an activity. Summer experiences are incredibly important. Colleges want to see that students are productively spending their summers. And whether it's taking some courses on a college campus or a boarding school campus or even a local school, or getting involved in a community service activity or having an internship or working. What they don't love, by the way, are just teen tours. Traveling around, yes, you're enriching your life, you're visiting cultural heritage sites, you're visiting museums, but that's not quite as beneficial in terms of college admission for something that's, very, very hands-on, taking a course, being an active, engaged learner, for example. And then I want to say that if you're applying test optional to colleges, your extracurricular are even more important. And you might think of sort of the pillars of college admission, the most important factors being, say, your academic record, your test scores, your extracurricular commitment, and let's put one more thing out here, a combination of your essays and your recommendations from teachers and counselor. Those 4 are, well, there's really 5, but I'm putting it like sort of 4 legs as a stool might have, and that you can balance on top of that, very, very easily. But as soon as you take away one of the legs, like say test scores, that stool it stays up, it becomes slightly wobbly, but each of the 3 legs that are left have to support a lot more, which means without test scores, your extracurricular, your academic record, your recommendations and your essays are going to be even more important. And the one thing that you really can have a lot of control over is how meaningful your extracurricular activities really are. But it's not just having the extracurricular activities. It's a matter of, like, how do you showcase them? How do you share them with a college? And yes, it's true that Common App, and I've mentioned that a few times, and that's because there's over 1,000 colleges that accept the Common App. It's pretty much almost any college you can name. For certainly here in Florida, all 12 of our state universities, 20-something of our private universities, all 8 of the Ivy Leagues, places like Northwestern and Duke and University of Southern California. I'd say the 2 most well-known schools that are not on Common App that have their own application are Georgetown, which, by the way, requires a resume, and MIT, and the entire University of California system, the 9 universities, UCLA, UC Santa Barbara, Berkeley, etc. But besides the fact that Common App, so we'll stick with Common App for now, and by the way, same is true for the University of California system, gives you room to have some level of detail, not much, about your extracurricular activities, 150 characters to explain what the activity is. You can't really convey enough, especially if you have a lot to say about a particular activity. So your resume, which you'll see which colleges want that in a minute, your resume really allows you to come alive as an applicant, because you can have many more than 150 characters to describe what it is that you've accomplished. So you can truly showcase some of your most important accomplishments and the impact that they've had on you and other people. The depth of commitment, your level of leadership, the fact that you planned something, organized something, led something, initiated something, and then of course the collaboration that you collaborated with your peers on. You work together as a collegial group to accomplish blah blah blah. And so what you're doing with a resume is truly reinforcing how you're going to contribute to campus life. And that's the thing that colleges are really looking for. They don't want couch potatoes. Remember, they want active, engaged learners. That doesn't just mean in the classroom, it means outside of the classroom. And the only way a college is going to truly be able to tell what you're going to contribute beyond the classroom is by looking at what you have already contributed in your high school and in your community outside of the classroom. And it's very true that once you have a great resume, which I like to start as early as 9th grade with my students, and even my grandson who's in 8th grade, we're talking already about, hey, let's start putting your resume together. That's going to make it significantly easier to create a Common App activities page, which is a requirement, and it's going to be an even stronger one than it would have been if you didn't have the resume. And what you see on the right, and you'll see more examples later, is just a little version of what a resume could look like. And so a resume for a teenager applying to college can be pretty. When you're applying for a job later in life, it's not going to be quite as pretty. It's not going to have pictures, but you're a teenager, you're a kid, and you can have a resume that is fun and perhaps a little bit more reflective of who you are. So beyond just applying to college, that resume is really important because it teaches you how to market yourself and truly build your self-confidence. If I've got a really great resume, which is for college applications, by the way, can be up to 2 pages. If you were out looking for your first job, no, it would probably just be 1 page at most. But I'm going to be able to go into, let's say, an interview with or without my resume much more prepared because I've already spelled out in, let's say, 3, 4, or 5 bullet points what I've accomplished and why. It's very easy for me in talking about myself to explain why a particular activity is so important to me. So definitely it gives you great talking points, for interviews, and whether these are just, interviews because you're applying to med school, for example, or applying for a job or applying to college, having that resume just gives you lots of self-confidence and great talking points. And it means you always have something at hand. If a professor says to you, hey, Jason, I've got a great research opportunity for you with Professor Jones. Give me your resume, let me present it to him, and that will let him know if he wants to interview you. If you have to say, oh, I've got to go back to my, dorm room and create one, you always want one at the ready. So if you start one while you're in high school, you'll be able to reformat it in college because it's not going to look quite like this. It'll look more professional, and you're going to keep it up to date, just as I do with my students throughout high school. So just remember, no matter what, your resume is just telling your story, helps not only your application stand out, but it helps you stand out. So one of the handouts that I have listed for you has many more than just this. This is just a highlight of colleges that ask for a resume upload on Common App. Now, to the best of my knowledge, on the Common App itself, no one says, oh, this is where you must upload a resume. Because let's face it, not everyone really has a resume or knows how important extracurricular activities are. So resume upload is always optional. But I'm going to tell you that in the world of the world of college admissions, the word optional doesn't really mean what you think it does. 99.9% of the time, it means required. There's only one area of Common App I think is truly optional. That's the COVID-19 question, which hopefully next year will be removed because the students who are applying to college a year from now will not have gone through COVID in high school. But everything else that is optional is truly not optional. It's really required. So there are more than 300 colleges out of the roughly 1,000 on Common App that allow for a resume upload. Some of them, after you have submitted your application, one that didn't ask for a resume on Common App itself, but in the portal, because every college on Common App has what's called a portal where you can check the status of your application and whether they've gotten all of your recommendations, whether they have your transcript or anything else that they need. Sometimes they ask extra questions on the portal. So it's very important after you apply to a college to start checking its portal. But for example, Emory University has asked for a resume on the portal. Again, optional, but very beneficial to have it. And then on their own applications, Georgetown, as I said, I believe requires it, and MIT asks for it as well. And those are two of the more popular colleges that are not on Common App, but they still want a resume. And as I said, for the full list, you can just download that on our list of downloads. So I'd like to share with you a few different formats that I like to use. These are, resumes that I've created with students with changes of name and changes of some identifying information so that you can't really identify, who this is. This is in table format. You can tell right away without even reading it that this is somebody who might be interested in medicine because you see that DNA symbol like right over, here. And we also see hospice. One of the things I like about the way this resume was done is the fact that everything related to science research is together. I've not had the student list them as separate activities. I made it look like one larger activity with that student, but you can see what the various research things were and the fact that this student has been doing scientific research throughout high school. This student is actually now a daddy and a practicing physician. Okay, here's another format. This is actually a table as well, but it doesn't have any of the lines. And this is someone who was really into debate. Most students would not have, let's say, this level of detail, but this is actually the type of student, as is the previous one, that gets into one of the nation's most selective universities. This is a resume that was done originally just as sort of a very straight Microsoft Word document. And then the student decided to use Canva to do some reformatting. And this is what she came up with. And the colors that she's using reflect the official colors of that university. Let's see, this one doesn't have, okay. So this one is crimson and white in the separator bar. And you can make up your own sort of categories. This is just the first of a 2-page resume. And so there were other, activities on the second page, some of which had a separator bar like this, a title bar showing that this is a new category. This crimson and white, it's Harvard colors, and it's the exact color crimson of Harvard. Okay, don't remember whether this one, this gray was actually a university color, but it's very easy to look up the official color of a university and change any colored area of a resume or any font to that color, because when you do upload a resume on an application, it is specifically for that one school. It doesn't go to all the schools. Let's go to a little bit more specifics, try to quantify things a little bit, but before I do, let me find out if there have been any questions yet, because you can type questions in. Jay, any questions? Nothing yet. Okay. So these, I think, are some of the key criteria to, being able to evaluate an extracurricular activity. The first two really have to do with number of hours of commitment, which is very relevant, I would say, or very much related to the depth of commitment. So the time commitment is generally indicative of having, a great depth of commitment. The leadership role, which could be from like no leadership up to whatever the maximum level of leadership is, and how we can measure the impact of your particular activity. Just keep that in the back of your mind, because I also want to tell you that there are tiers of activity. So for instance, tier 1, which is the very highest tier, is something completely exceptional that no one else in your class is doing. Like, gee, everyone is a member of the Key Club, or there's a whole bunch of people on student newspaper. This is something that is completely like an unusual activity, and where you have an exceptional role in it. So I just listed 2 that I've seen in resumes the past couple of years. The American Mathematics Olympiad, which is a pretty big deal. Like, this is something that a student who might want to go to a place like, let's say MIT, Caltech, Harvey Mudd, Carnegie Mellon, Northwestern, a STEM kid or a math kid might want to have on his resume that he competed in the American Mathematics Olympiad, or got an award through Siemens Science, which is a national competition. So something that's rare, exceptional, that no one else has or very few people have would be a tier 1 activity. Tier 2 would be, I'd say, almost at that same level. So it might be state level as opposed to national level. So maybe you've got a leadership role in Model UN, but you've competed at the state level and you've won, best speaker or something like that, at the state level. Or maybe it's a state science fair that you have finished in the top, handful. So these are sort of just much more rarefied, more unusual activities, a very, very high level of leadership recognition. And I'm going to say that if you're trying to get into the most highly selective college, you need to have at least 1 or 2 things that are tier 1 and or tier 2. And again, just to show you what they are, because if you're certainly, these are going to help you no matter where you're looking for college. But if you're setting your goal at something not quite as selective, then it'd be nice to have tier 1 or tier 2. I would say they're not necessarily required, but they would help. Tier 3 is more like something that is local, that is within your community, that is perhaps regional. It could be, that you're playing on a team, you're playing in the orchestra, you're involved in yearbook, or the local math team. And so you've had some kind of a leadership role, but it's not a major one. Perhaps you were, the number 1, violin player, or you were the assistant editor. So you've had some kind of a leadership role, but you've been actively involved in it. The last level, the tier 4 level, would be, okay, I'm a member. I'm doing things that everyone else is doing. I'm involved in Key Club. That's a pretty common extracurricular club that is all community service. But if a student, let's say I'm working with them, we're working on the resume, and says, Key Club grades 9 through 12. I've gone to weekly meetings. I've helped discuss, future activities, and I've participated in a number of activities. I wouldn't even put that really on the resume, because there's nothing there specific. It really sounds like you haven't done very much, but you're trying to make it look, bigger than it is. But the student who instead is going to give me a list of 5 or 6 specific activities, the name of the activity, and perhaps what his role was. And it doesn't necessarily have to be leadership, but can elaborate just a little bit to say, monthly beach cleanups, helped ensure that Palm Beach County's beaches were, clean for residents and visitors to enjoy. Maybe it says helped organize these beach cleanups, or promoted these beach cleanups and typically got 20 to 30, of my peers to participate. Those things look, better. So tier 4 is absolutely still important, and there will be some activities that you have that you're just participating in, you're enjoying them. I'm on the swim team. I'm not taking home any great medals, but colleges will know that means I've gotten up very early every morning. I've, might have spent 15 or 20 hours, per week just competing. But it also shows that sort of I'm high energy. I can balance my time. I can collaborate because I'm part of a team, but it might still be a tier 4 unless, let's say, we went to regionals and I took a title. Then we might say, okay, we're edging up now to tier 3. Understand that there's no such thing as a bad activity, but there are some that might go lower down on the resume because they are less important. So I think it's important, especially when you're picking activities and then when you are elaborating, on your activities on your resume, to really think like an admission officer. What is it that they are going to look at? And in some cases, giving you points. And this is just one idea of, let's say, a point system that, could be used. So, and one of the worksheets I have actually has a whole work area for you to, give yourself points and help you, let's say, prioritize what you've done extracurricularly. So clearly, let's say if you've done it for 4 years, you're going to get 4 points. If you've done it for 3 years, you're going to get 3 points, etc. So clearly something that you've done longer is worth more. And an admission officer is going to think like that. Besides the number of years you've done it, they're also going to be looking at how much time have you devoted to it. And some things clearly are only on a seasonal basis. If you're on the soccer team, we know that soccer season might be, let's say, 3 months. So the number of hours per week is only going to be during that 3-month period. But there will be other activities let's just say, your participation in theater or yearbook or school newspaper, which are things that are at least all year, all school year. So, 36 weeks. So I'd say that if you think in terms of clumps of 5, if you've just done it under 5 hours a week, it's just worth 1 point. Once you cross that barrier and you're doing it roughly 10 hours a week or 15 hours a week or 20 hours a week, or somewhere, in those ranges, you're going to give yourself more and more points. And by the way, this is also a very good way to help a student organize her activities in Common App, in terms of listing from most to least important. Okay, so we have length of commitment and then how many hours of commitment, but then leadership role is, well, we've been talking about leadership, all evening. 4 points, you have the very highest role that you can have. And I would say it probably should be in a pretty major activity. So if you're president of the Honor Society, you're captain of the cross country team, you're editor-in-chief of the school yearbook, you're the drum major, so you're leading the marching band. At work, you have a major leadership role in that you're the shift manager. Next level down, 3 points, where you're sort of like the number 2. Maybe you're the vice president, you're the assistant manager, a lower down editor, could be the sports page editor, but that would give you, 3 points. A lower level leadership role, but there's still some leadership. Maybe you are just the person who is head of the committee because you're organizing Diversity Day as part of the let's say the European Students Association or something like that. And finally, if you just have a membership that you're an engaged member, but you're not necessarily having any real leadership, then you can still give yourself 1 point. Okay, so we have the depth of commitment, the number of hours, the leadership, and then finally, and this is really I think the really important one is like measurable impact. Can we say that you are first place, you're second place, and that it's in a very high level, competition perhaps, or performance of some kind. So if you are the Lincoln Douglas, which is just one category of debate, but if you were the national debate champion in Lincoln Douglas, or maybe you're number 2 or number 3, but you're way up there on a national level, or not only are you a thespian, but you've actually performed on Broadway. Now, I'm not saying you have to be the star of the show. It might have just been, a very minor role, but the fact that that's something that is national. So you can go down from national to state, to regional, to basically just, high school or local community. So I think pretty much you'll see that at a bare minimum, you're going to have 4 points, because you're going to have 1 point in each of the 4 categories. But it is a great way to organize things. And of course, something that has, 12, 13, 14, 15, the more points it has, the more you're saying, at least you're quantifying for yourself that your activities are really, really strong. And I think right now that's about all I have to say, about activities. I'm going to bring back a couple of the resumes just to show you again, because you may want to take a couple of screenshots of the kinds of things that I like to put, in a resume. And I think it's important to know that, let's see if I can highlight in here, that almost everything, other than like when you first place or second place, starts with an action verb in the correct tense. These are not sentences for the most part. They are usually just, statements. So he researched, he studied, he verified, he exposed, he wrote. Up here, this is in present tense. I shadow, shadow nurses. I take part in this. I work as. So everything began with an action verb, other than when you win something. So the wins, you really want to highlight when they are super important wins, like this one has. But over here is, so she participates, and it's not super strong, but participates is. She's currently learning something. She's engaging with. She's continually learning. Here's one where if you get selected for something, I wouldn't just say that, you are a student ambassador. It's important to say that you were selected by. She helps with, she participates in. But I always start with an action verb, and it's always in the correct tense. So please don't think that every one of your activities has to have like all things in the present tense or all things in the past tense. Because in each activity, there will be things that you've previously done, and things that you're doing now, and things that you will be doing. And you saw back here, let's go back here to this one with the research that I put all of them together. And they were in, I did this one was on, in, pretty much in chronological order. You could do chronological or reverse chronological. I think when you're putting them all together, I like to see more chronological. Let's just say that you're in student, government. And let's say you started freshman year, you were just a rep. Sophomore year, perhaps you were secretary or treasurer. Junior year, you were vice president. Senior year, you were president. I would list all of those leadership roles directly under the, student government itself. And it would be one activity, but my bullets would highlight the most important things I did, and probably more important to be focusing on the most recent 2 years. And I might be starting off, my first bullet might be something about, sought increasing levels of leadership and responsibility throughout my 4 years of high school. So we're setting the stage, and I would never put in there like line by line to say, well, I was elected this as a freshman and elected this as a sophomore and elected this as a junior, because under the name of the activity, you're listing, each of the positions that you've had. And I think it's always important that whatever leadership roles you have, show up. They're in bold. They're listed on the same. If you're doing a left-right format like this, they're listed on the left side along with the name, of the activity. Let's see, this one doesn't. There's no leadership on the left on this particular page, but if there were, the leadership role would be immediately under. Well, this is a leadership role. The whole school ambassador, the model UN. If this student had, various roles, I would probably encourage him to, well, her, I see it's Catalina, but that's not her real name. But I would have her list all of her leadership roles in bold immediately, under the name of the activity. It's really important that someone who's looking at your resume, who's not going to read every line, by the way, sees the most important things first. And your goal on any resume is to have as much white space as you can so that someone's going to want to read your resume. If it's so cluttered up, no one's really going to want to read it. This one is very dense in here, and I guess maybe a STEM person might be interested in going into that level, of detail. This is a little heavier than I might like to see right now, but I can say that this is a student who did apply to a number of BSMD programs, which are probably the hardest thing to get into at the when you're applying to college. Not every school has one, and the admit rates, even at the less selective universities that have BSMD programs, are probably about 4%. 5% if you're lucky. Very, very, very hard to get into. This student applied to a number of BSMD programs, actually got into all of them, but turned them all down because he did wind up, at Harvard. And I've had students who've done exactly the opposite, that have gotten into, a very, very prestigious university, but chose a BSMD program at a much less prestigious university because it meant they did not have to go through the med school application process. And I do a lot of med school admissions work. I can tell you that it makes applying to college look like kindergarten, because applying to med school is a much more complex process with many, 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 many more essays. And yes, you absolutely have to have a resume when you're applying, to med school. Okay. Are there any questions, Jay?
How is summer employment viewed versus summer research / internship for a student interested in an engineering degree?
Okay. So the question was about basically summer activities for a student who's interested in engineering. And there are, I'd say, at least three different categories of things that a student can do who's interested in engineering. Number one, they can take a great course on a college campus that is in any way related to engineering, preferably something that's very, very hands-on. There's, I think, Operation Catapult at Rose-Hulman. Small, very, very impressive engineering school in Indiana, where the kids do lots of hands-on work, and they work with a lot of local companies as well. And it's almost all I believe it's all engineering. There are a few other STEM things in there. Okay, I could be taking that course at Rose-Hulman. By the same token, I could be at University of Pennsylvania, and so more impressive school, but it doesn't necessarily mean I need to have that to get into Georgia Tech, for example. But taking a course on a college campus in the summer is one opportunity. Related to that, let's say you, for whatever reason, you're not going to a college campus, you want to stay home. How about if you take the next level up of AP Physics? Because there's 3 years of AP Physics. There's AP Physics 1, there's AP Physics 2. Each of those is a full year. And those are based on algebra. And then there's AP Physics C. There's 2 different one-semester courses in AP Physics C. Those are based on calculus. So you could take an AP course over the summer. Okay, so academics is one way to support, in the summer is one way to support, potential engineering major. I could get a job or an internship that is in any way related to engineering. Maybe it's a friend of the family who has a company that is going to give me some minor role, but I'm going to get great exposure to the things that, an engineer would be doing working. And there was a third thing, Jay? It was academics. It was working, internship. Doesn't matter whether it's a paid job or an internship. Was there a third thing they asked about engineering?
No.
Okay. And by the way, this is my son, Jason, who actually oversees, all of our schools score at the top, all of our learning centers score at the top, all of our schools score academy, and all of the educational consulting. So he's my partner in presenting. I couldn't do it without him presenting webinars. Okay. Is there another question?
That's the only question I got.
Okay. So let me just move forward beyond the extracurricular activities and the resume. We have a really pretty wonderful webinar coming up next week that Kathy Hart, who's one of the other college counselors on my team, basically it's all about your GPA and the fact that the GPA that's on your transcript is not necessarily the GPA that is being used by colleges for admission. It's not the GPA, for those of you who live in Florida, it is not the GPA that is being used for Bright Futures. And if you are applying to any of the University of California system schools, it is absolutely not the GPA that they use. So she is going to talk about the various ways in which colleges recalculate your GPA, what they're actually looking for within your transcript. She'll be focusing a lot on rigor. It's a very, very eye-opening webinar, and you'll certainly be able to recalculate your GPA the way different colleges do. If you've enjoyed this webinar, there's a few other webinars that my team and I have done that are all on our website under Score Webinars that you can listen to whenever you like. One of the more recent ones, and one which I will be redoing, last year was the first year, but it was a whole Common App walkthrough, which, the Common App, many people think it's very straightforward, but there's a lot of nuances to it, and learning sort of all the tricks of the trade and what really works well, what makes for a more outstanding application. That's everything that I cover. And that's probably my longest webinar. I believe it's well over 2 hours to go through the whole Common App. So you might want to break it up into smaller segments. We also do a college admissions boot camp every summer. It's for a large group of students. It could be 50 or 60 students, where the students really get to go through every aspect of college planning, create a resume, finalize their college list, get at least their personal statement done, because they also get one-on-one sessions with our essay experts. We do it at Suncoast High School. It is not limited to Suncoast students, and it's actually very low cost. So you can't quite sign up for it yet, but you can put your name on the list for interest. We are starting a current special that is a special promotion that you can work with us for a short period of time to basically recalculate your GPA in a variety of ways, and to look at the courses that you're currently taking and help you plan out the rest of your high school courses based on your goals for college. Am I looking at Florida State? Am I looking at Rollins? Am I looking at Boston University, High Point University? What level of university? We can help you figure out what courses you should be taking. And we certainly hope that you'll tell your friends, about us, and call us if there's anything that we can do to help you. Let me just make sure there's no other questions before we end.
Can you clarify, would a job not be viewed as favorably as research?
Okay. Would a job not be viewed as favorably as research? I think they would be viewed equally favorably. Colleges love kids who do things hands-on. Okay, your job is hands-on. You're not just sitting at your desk reading. Well, maybe if you were an editor, you might be doing a lot of reading, but and hands-on research is incredibly enlightening. Experiential education, learning by doing. If I'm thinking about applying as a STEM major or going to any like pre-med, Having research under my belt is incredibly helpful. There are some companies where you can actually hire someone, say from Harvard or Yale or Duke or another prestigious university to guide you through a research project. Or you might have a connection, let's say at FAU, where you know a professor who's doing research and you can get involved in their research. And there's basically multiple kinds of research, but in general, it's either independent research that you're doing completely on your own, or it's research, and this is the much more common one, under the direction of a physician, of a college professor, of someone else, but also working. And especially if it's in support of your major, that if I'm looking to major in journalism and I can get a summer internship, not even a paid internship, an unpaid internship, let's just say they offered, I don't know if they do or not, let's say with the Sun Sentinel. Okay, that looks wonderful for what it is that I'd like to do in college. However, let's just say you're undecided, you have no idea what you want to do in college. Whether you work or have an internship or do research, the idea is anything that you do that enriches your life, that gives you more skills and a larger ability to contribute when you get on a college campus. Any of those things is going to really bode well for you. What you don't want to do is just sit home and, just hang out at the beach or something like that. Hey, if you're babysitting all summer, you've got a job as a mother's helper, but you think you'd like to be a child psychologist or you'd like to be a teacher. Okay, now we've got an activity that's related to a future career goal. You could be the bag boy at Publix. And by the way, that can lead to the most interesting college application essay, because I've already seen one that was a bag girl at Publix and how people treated her. Something similar, someone who was in New York City and worked behind like a hot dog cart on the corner and met all kinds of people. That can make for a great college application essay. So the idea is just be actively engaged, and the more competitive the school, the more engaged you want to be, the more leadership, the more unusual of an activity, the more you want to think about like starting something new. And this is something that my team and I do with students, where you can say, listen, I'm not hiring you for college counseling. I really just want someone to work with me to like start a project. So, perhaps it's a community outreach project. Maybe it's a blog that you're doing. Maybe it's a podcast that you're doing on a regular basis. But we can help you start a brand new project and work with you to get something started. And now that becomes completely unique. You have shown initiative, you've shown leadership. You get other kids involved because you want other people involved. You want to grow your activity. Growing the activity is incredibly important. You want to make sure that one of the students involved is younger than you, so that when you graduate, you have a legacy that you can pass on to the younger student, who can then take over and perhaps expand whatever it is that you started. Is that it?
That's it.
So thanks. And if you have any questions, feel free to email hello@jraec.com. That'll come to me. And I'm happy to answer, any of your questions related to, college admissions or resumes or activities. And, thank you. Appreciate your being here tonight. Have a lovely evening.